Thank you, Lord, so much for our time here tonight. And I pray that you would lead us by your Spirit, give us understanding, that you would open this word of life to us. Yes. We would see Jesus high and lifted up. Thank you for your glorious revelation. What a privilege it is to come to this word. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. All right, so we're going to be in 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 7 and 8. And we were in this last week. It's where we ended. And we're going to overlap. Let it springboard into what we're looking at tonight. And quite possibly, we will be finishing up Solomon this evening. But we have yet to see where that winds up. So, let's have a look here at verses 7 and 8.
Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Molech, the abomination of the Ammonites, on the mountain east of Jerusalem. And so he did for all his foreign wives who made offerings and sacrifice to their gods.
We had seen last week that Solomon's heart was led astray by his many wives. Not that they might lead him away or they could lead him away, but looking at what the Lord had given command back in Deuteronomy and is spoken about here in verse 2, it says, "They will surely turn away your heart after their gods." So God is warning Solomon. He's warning the kings of Israel. Don't intermarry with these foreigners because they will surely. And we looked at that wording from last time we were together. Where is similar wording to that found? What is the command that's given? In Genesis chapter 2, the Lord speaks to Adam and says, "Don't eat. You can eat." The Lord commanded him, "Eat from all of the trees of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For the day you eat from it, you will surely die." Not you will die, you might die, but you will surely die. And so we see the same kind of prohibition here, the same command. Don't intermarry with these foreigners because they will surely turn your heart after their gods. Now, this has nothing to do with those who would intermarry with foreigners who have already come to faith in the God of Israel. And we've seen examples of that. Give me 2 examples. Rahab and Ruth. So Rahab was a Canaanite, and Ruth was a Moabite. So with both of them, the interesting thing is they are in the lineage of Jesus. They appear in the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew chapter 1.
Right.
Now, Solomon, his heart is turned away from the Lord because of all of these women. And with that being the case, he made for them, it says that he followed after their gods in verse 5, Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and he didn't follow wholly the Lord as David his father had done. And then we read about Chemosh, who was the god of the Moabites, and Molech, the abomination of the Ammonites. And what did he do? Where did he build their high places? This is verse 7.
East Hill of Jerusalem.
The East Hill of Jerusalem. Now, before you say anything, where is the East Hill of Jerusalem? Or excuse me, the mountain east of Jerusalem. What is that mountain? No. So Sinai is way south. Mount of Olives. Yes. So he built these high places on the mountain east of Jerusalem, the Mount of Olives. So that's verse 7. So on the Mount of Olives. Now, we've been speaking about Solomon as a type of Christ, but there's also contrasts regarding Solomon's life and the life of Christ. So this is one of those contrasts. Solomon builds high places on the Mount of Olives for these gods, the god of the Ammonites and the Moabites, Chemosh and Molech. With that being the case, what do we see the contrast with Jesus, the Messiah, the Anointed One, concerning the Mount of Olives?
Pure sacrifice.
What is it?
The pure sacrifice.
The pure sacrifice. How so? How does that connect with
He
Mount of
said
Olives?
He is sinless and he's going to die for the sins of the world. It's the night before, or the night of his betrayal, that he's there when they come to get him.
Okay, so concerning the Mount of Olives, what's taking place with him on the Mount of Olives the night of his betrayal? What's happening before he's betrayed? You got the right line.
He's praying.
He's praying. Yeah. And he's agonizing over the fact that he's about to go to the cross the next day, the next morning.
And he's very keenly aware of all of the activities that happen here.
Yeah.
In Kings, this is not off of his radar at all like it would be for you.
No, he's very well acquainted, very familiar with what happened almost 1,000 years earlier, some 930 years earlier.
Probably many years on.
Pardon me?
And probably many years on.
Oh yes, and many years on. And we're going to look at that in just through our time tonight. But yes, and many years on.
Interesting. Chemosh was
Yeah.
the god that they put their children. They sacrificed their children.
Mhm.
That was on the Mount of Olives. Here God was asking Jesus to be sacrificed as his son
Yes.
in the same place that many children died for.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't Molech one that sacrificed children to?
So both of them, Molech and Chemosh, is the gods that they sacrificed their children to. Yet here is the one. So, all right. So we've got Israel. We've got Jerusalem. All right, the city of David. And here is the Temple Mount. We'll put. All right. There is the temple. Right here. This is the city of David. We've got a valley here, and then coming up the slope, this is valley, this is the Kidron Valley. The slope coming up here, and this is the Mount of Olives right here, okay? This is the peak of the Mount of Olives, east of the city. And the Garden of Gethsemane would have been in this region right here. Okay? And on the Mount of Olives is where these high places for these false gods are, for the worshiping and sacrificing of their own children. We're going to find out that in the Valley of Topheth, which would be on the other side of Jerusalem, that in the Hinnom Valley, that there will be a king some 300 years later who will destroy these high places finally. These high places, you mentioned, they will be in place. They will remain there for 3 centuries. 300 years. That's intense. How many kings would rule during that period of time? Say from Rehoboam, which is Solomon's son. So from Rehoboam onwards, how many kings would rule in Judah? Any guess?
10?
No, try more.
6.
13.
Try more.
20.
Try more.
50.
Just about 30. 29. In 300 years, there will be 39. Excuse me, 29. What did I say? 29.
Every 10 years.
Some reigned 3 years, some 11, some were co-regents, so they would overlap one another. And of them, no, until Josiah what? For this? For the 300 years? Yes, from Solomon until Josiah is 300 years.
Back then,
Yeah, it could be, it would be, yeah. But most of the kings of Judah, they died of natural causes. Most of them, not all of them, but most of them died just in. And no, I just said they slept with their fathers.
Assassinated?
Hmm?
They weren't assassinated.
They weren't assassinated. A couple were killed in battle.
But I would raise the possibility highly that those that weren't obeying God were probably not blessed because of that. I say it that way. But it's funny
So
how
using the
some
word
things-
curse.
It's funny though how comes around, goes around.
Mm-hmm. So the total amount from Rehoboam on until the exile would be 387 years. But from Solomon erecting these until Josiah, the fifth last king of Judah, would be 300 years that these high places remained. And of those kings, so 29 kings from Rehoboam onward, so it doesn't include Solomon, David, or Saul. All right? So Rehoboam onwards. It's really dealing with the divided kingdom, the southern kingdom of Israel, Judah. And of those 29 kings, 8 of them will be Tov, and 11 of them will be Ra. Any idea what that is?
Righteous and non-righteous?
Well, close, very, very close. So Tov is good, Ra is evil. So 8 of them were good. I wrote that for a reason. I wrote it that way for a reason. Good, and 11 were evil. So it would be 300 years, and then God would raise up a king who would deal with these high places. His name is Josiah. We will look at him shortly, but not directly with Solomon, but with his son Rehoboam. So we'll come to that shortly. Now, because of these things, so we see Jesus because of these things. So Jesus, here he is, almost 1,000 years later, on the Mount of Olives, the Garden of Gethsemane. And there he is agonizing. And he prays a prayer. He says, Father, if it's your will, please, what? Take this cup from me. Then he prays something else with that.
Not yours.
Not my will,
It sounds like
God.
yours.
Yeah, not my will, but yours be done. Why do you suppose he prays that prayer? Is he wrestling with the will of God? With the will of his Father?
Well, he's human. He has the same, if it says I'm reading it, he has the same human pains that I do. If I'm hurting because I lost my mother, he hurt because he lost either somebody or something. He's supposed to have all the same characteristics as we. So why wouldn't he want to pray to not be hurt?
So,
I know. Just my
so
opinion.
we'll look at that and let's address that. He doesn't have all of the same human characteristics as we do. He's human, and he has human characteristics, but not all of the same human characteristics as we do, meaning that he has no sinful nature.
Oh, okay.
He does not have a fallen nature. So we can rightly say he was tempted in every way like we are,
All right.
but without sin.
Right.
Was he capable of sinning?
Yes, you could.
No.
Oh, you are? Oh.
Why could he not sin? Because he's God.
Because
God cannot sin. It was not possible for him to sin. So you might say, well, the deck was already stacked then. Why even bother coming? Why even tempt him? Why have the Holy Spirit? We looked at this last week. The Holy Spirit led Jesus into the wilderness. For what purpose?
Tempting.
To be tested, to be tempted by the devil. But the temptation came at the end of the 40 days. The leading was for fellowship with the Father, and then for the tempter to tempt him. Why? Why allow Jesus? Why put him in a place where Satan could come and test him if it was not possible for him to sin? What's the point?
Legitimacy.
To prove the legitimacy of
God.
him as God. To prove the legitimacy of two things. One, he's human. It said at the end of 40 days he was hungry. So, like us, he's human. He was hungry. So Satan comes to tempt him. But with the temptation, what does Jesus do in response? How does he deal with the temptation? The word. It is written. So he's going with the Lord says surely this and surely that, and so on and so forth. Don't go with these foreigners because they will surely turn you away. Don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for you will surely die. All right? So Jesus, he knows the word. Why does he know the word? Has he been studying? Is it because he applies? He is the word. He's the word made flesh. And the word dwelt among us.
Yeah, that's right. The word.
So he is the word. It's not just that he studied and applied himself, he memorized it, and so he knows the word. Now, there was part of that process because he grew in what? What does Luke chapter 2 tell us about Jesus? As a boy, he grew in wisdom and stature, in favor with God and man. So he grew in wisdom and in stature. Wisdom means that he continued to increase. So did he read the scriptures? Yes, he absolutely did. Did he pray? Yes, he did, because he's having communion with the Father. So when he prays, so with all of that, the temptation was to show, one, he is human. Two, it was to show that he was without sin. He could not sin because he was God, but it's not that we say, the deck was stacked, and so to speak. But we look at that in a sense as Jesus being our example. But it's not that Jesus is our example, that we follow him as an example, and that's it, right? Now, is he an example to us?
Yeah.
Yes. But is it alone? Is it that he's an example only for us?
No.
Is it only that he's an example for us?
No, because we couldn't do it.
We couldn't do it. So it's by his strength. We follow. We're to be imitators of Christ, right? He's our example. But we can't imitate Christ in our own strength.
The whole concept of looking at that with the argument the deck was stacked, that's a human, imperfect, very uneducated view of who you're dealing with.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And we look at it in the relationship of he's our example. So, but he had the deck stacked and he couldn't sin. I don't have the deck stacked. I can sin. So, it's not fair. We're not on the same page, not the same level. Well, no, we're not. But he gives us more strength. He gives us his strength. He gives us himself, his presence, his power, and his provision, right? I think I'm starting to preach. We need to get back here. Okay.
I like it.
So here is Jesus. He's being tempted. And so the question was, why did he pray, if it be your will, take this cup from me, but not my will, your will be done? Why did he pray that? Did he have a different will than his Father?
No. No, same.
So why did he pray that with those words?
There was no other way.
Pardon me?
We wouldn't have known it,
We wouldn't have known what?
that he was God,
Okay.
he was praying.
So how does that prayer in itself show us that he's God? Father, if it be your will, take this cup from me.
Right
But
there.
not my will, your will be done. How does that prayer show us that
Word
he's God?
Father. Father, Father.
That doesn't show us that he's God.
Oh,
Because he told his disciples, pray, our Father who is in heaven. So it could be taken in that much. Over here, I heard a response.
Sure, there was no other way.
To show there was no other way.
yeah.
If there's another way,
Yeah.
let's go with that. But not my will, your will be done. What he's saying there is, I'm not presenting something new. I'm not presenting an alternative here. He's saying my will is in communion or conjunction with your will. And what he's saying here is this in basic terms, that he's praying in such a way so that his disciples can hear him, right? He comes back and checks on his disciples. They're asleep, and he says, could you not watch with me 1 hour? Why does he say, could you not watch? He doesn't say, could you not wait? Could you not pray? He says, could you not watch with me? Why does he say, use the word watch?
Observe him what he's doing.
Good guess, not quite.
You know,
I don't think. I'm gonna show you why.
It kind of reminds me of when he's coming back.
Okay? Reminds you when he's coming back?
Watching.
All right. Think backwards. You got to think backwards, not forwards in this.
Used to acquaint that with the concept of off church.
Okay, drifting off in church. Okay, so the church had not begun. He's not yet begun to build his church.
Guilty on that part.
No, I don't. All right, go back to the Exodus. The night of the Passover, it was a night of what? Watching.
watching, right,
It
yeah.
was a night of watching. What night is he being betrayed?
That night.
Passover.
That's all right.
Could you not watch? This is about watching.
You weren't watching.
This is about watching. And so they would be awake for a short time. He'd go back, and 3 times he did this, and he prayed, Father, if it is your will, take this cup from me, but not my will, your will be done. Goes back to his disciples, finds them sleeping again. Goes back and prays a 3rd time. And at the end of the 3rd time, he comes and he says, it is enough. It's time. Get up. And that's when the Judas and the detachment from the temple guard and so on is coming to arrest him. He prays this prayer in earshot of his disciples so that they will hear what he's praying and they will record it for us. They will know that there's no other way. If there's any other way, Jesus is saying, if there's any other way, let it be so. But what he's saying is, there's no other way. It wasn't for his information. He's not learning this, and he's not begging God to let him off the hook. Why did Jesus? He's going to tell Pilate in just a few hours, he's going to stand before Pilate. He says, for this very reason was I born.
Yeah.
So he knows his purpose. He knows his will. He didn't waver in that moment. It wasn't like, okay, this is getting too close. My feet are too close to the fire. It's hot. I don't like it. And so spring me from this, Father. That's not his prayer. And why does he say, take this cup from me? Why does he use the word cup? Why does he refer to it like that?
Back in the scriptures, talked about how the Lord's wrath be poured out of the cup, or you will drink out of the cup till it's dregs, to the very, very bottom.
All right, to its very dregs. What are dregs?
Last drop, last.
The wine. That's.
Okay, so, all right. So in Psalm 75 and verse 8, for in the hand of the Lord there is a cup with foaming wine, well mixed, and he pours it out from it, and all the wicked of the earth shall drain it down to the dregs. So we don't have, I don't think we have majority, I don't think, or all, are not wine drinkers. How many coffee drinkers? Any tea drinkers?
Well,
So have you ever had tea or coffee where either it's I don't even know how to describe it because I don't drink it.
Filter
Where
falls down.
the filter falls down, you get the grounds
Oh, yeah,
come into the
yeah.
cup, and you're like, okay, whatever.
Tea bag
Or the tea bag bursts, and you've got some of the tea leaves that go to the bottom, and you drink it, but you don't actually drink the
The tea leaves.
leaves or the grinds,
Yeah.
but you drink it down to.
To it.
In other words, what they're saying is, what he's saying here is, I'm draining it to the last drop. Here's what he says. You shall drain it down to the dregs. God's wrath is being poured out upon the wicked, is what's being referred to here. So what's Jesus saying? Take this cup from me. But not my will, your will be done. What's the cup? The cup of his wrath. And he's going to drink it on behalf of you and me, the wicked. We should be the ones, the wicked, drinking it down to the dregs. But Jesus said, I'll take the cup. That's the very reason that he came. And he drank it down to its dregs on the cross. He didn't. People went by him and they said, if you are the Son of God, what did they say?
Free yourself from there.
Come down. Show us. If you are the Son of God,
Yeah.
come down from there.
Yeah.
And he could have. He had the power to
Yeah.
do so.
Yep.
He told Peter, put away your sword. Don't you know that I could call 12 legions of angels
Yeah. There you go.
Anytime.
at any time? Still on the cross, he could have done that. He didn't even need angels to come and release him. He could have just said, by the word of his mouth, said, done. This is done. Not, it is finished. On our behalf, he could have said, I'm not doing this. Done. And just come down. And that'd be, and then just say, all right, you're done. Boom. Right? But he didn't. He prays the prayer to show there's no other way. So the sacrifice, this is what Jesus prays in the garden. Remember? This location is where the place of child sacrifice had gone on in Israel's earliest days of its nationhood. And here he is now, the one and only child, who is worthy to be sacrificed, who is pure. And he would be sacrificed on behalf of the wicked. And he would be sacrificed in even for those who had sacrificed to Moloch and to Chemosh and repented of it. Like Ruth would have been involved in that type of worship because Molech was the god of the Moabites. So this is a Hardach, Chemosh. So Chemosh, like school instead of sh. It's not a sh. It's a hard. Anyway, nevertheless. Anyway, so with that, we see what's going on, and the Lord. Look at verse 9 now, back in our text, verse 9. We're
Sorry to
finishing.
interrupt, but it was puzzling right now. What was the value of giving sacrificing? What was that supposed to accomplish in their mind? What
Of which?
Sacrificing the children.
Oh,
What was that?
sacrificing the children.
Yeah.
These were false gods
Yeah, but what was that supposed to accomplish for them?
because they believed that Molech and Chemosh were gods that of fertility and gave them their blessings, and so they would sacrifice their children to appease the gods because they believed that their children belonged to these gods, and so they would sacrifice their firstborn in order to say, okay, this is the value I place on you, my God.
We still do it today. It's called abortion.
And we still do it today, called abortion. Yes, it's true.
Well, yeah, I never thought of it that way.
But notice, God distinguished his people from all the other people way back in Genesis 22 when he told Abraham, I want you to take your son, your only son, and bring him to the land that I will show you. And it is there that they go up the mountain. And when they get at the top of the mountain, Isaac is bound. He's placed on the altar with wood and fire, prepared, getting ready for the fire. And he is the sacrifice. And when Abraham takes the knife to sacrifice him, the angel of the Lord, who is Jesus, speaks to him, Abraham, Abraham, stop. Now I know that you obey me. And in the course of that interaction, he turns his attention behind him where there is a ram caught by its horns in the thorn bush. And he was to sacrifice that. See, this was never a thing where God was saying, I want you to sacrifice your son and carry it out. He's saying, I do not accept child sacrifice. You're to be distinct. But what I want you to do here is to dramatize what I'm going to do 2,000 years from now in this very place by the only one who qualifies as the sacrifice.
I know a lot of people thought Isaac was just a little boy, but he was actually probably a man by this time.
He was probably 30 years of age,
Yeah.
thereabouts.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
And
So-
anytime he could have said, what do you think you're doing? I'm not doing this, but he went along too.
That's
So.
too exact.
God's too exact, so I would argue that Jacob was 30 years of age.
Isaac, honey.
Excuse me, Isaac. I would submit that Isaac was 30 years of age when they went up on the mountain.
For a minute, she's detail oriented.
She is very detail oriented, yes. Yes, she is, and I love her for it. One of the reasons, one of the very many. All right, verse 9.
The Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who appeared to him twice.
All right, so the Lord is angry with him. And what ends up taking place in the midst of this, well, let's look at it, verse 11. Let's look at verse 11 and down to 13. Continue with that.
So the Lord said to Solomon, since this is your attitude and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees which I commanded you, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates. Nevertheless, for the sake of David your father, I will not do this during your lifetime. I will tear it out of the hand of your son. Yet I will not tear the whole kingdom from him, but I will give him one tribe for the sake of David my servant and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen.
Pardon me?
Do we have two tribes? Yeah, Benjamin and they came after.
Yes, see, all right. I will not tear away all the kings. I'll give one tribe to your son. The one tribe is Judah. But it ends up, we'll see that take place in chapter 12, where the actual representation of the tearing, when the man of God comes to Jeroboam, and no, it's still here in 11. Sorry, not. It'll take place then, but in verse 28. Verse 28, still chapter 11, all right? And the man Jeroboam was very able. And when Solomon saw the young man was industrious, he gave him charge over all the forced labor of the house of Joseph. And at that time, when Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem, the prophet Ahijah, the Shilonite, found him on the road. Now Ahijah had dressed himself in a new garment. Anybody remember what garment sounds like in Hebrew? It sounds like Shlomo. So Shlomo is the Hebrew name for Solomon. It's spelled with the same letters. All right? So dressed himself in a new garment, and the two of them were alone in the open country. And Ahijah laid hold of the new garment that was on him, and he tore it into how many? 12 pieces. And he said to Jeroboam, take for yourself, verse 31, take for yourself how many? 10 pieces. How many are left? 2. All right, good math. All right, so the Lord tells Solomon back here in verse 12 and 13, I'm going to tear the kingdom out of the hand of your son. I'm taking it away. But I'm not doing it in your day for the sake of your father David, but I'm going to do it in the time when your son begins to rule. And I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of David, my servant. So does God have different math?
Because he says even in 32, it says, I will give you 10 tribes, but then the next verse says, and he shall have one.
All right, so what's going on there? There's a couple of things that will take place. If you look down in chapter 12, verse 21.
Are the Levites mixed up in this question?
No.
That's what I was wondering, but
There-
then
there's-
one's like, no, that doesn't make sense.
Let's look at 23. So 12:23. And we're at Todd, I believe.
Say to Rehoboam, son of Solomon, king of Judea, and to all the house of Judea and Benjamin, and to the rest of the people.
Is that what I wanted?
When Rehoboam arrived in Jerusalem, he mustered all of Judah and the tribe of
There we
Benjamin.
go, 21. Sorry, it was 21. Thank you.
That's what you said first.
Yeah, I changed. My eyes jumped past it. All right, so the kingdom, things are going on. The people say, okay, Rehoboam, we don't like you. We're moving on. And they all went back to To your own house, they said in verse 16, chapter 12. Go to your own house, David. So Israel went to their tents. But Rehoboam reigned over the people of Israel who lived in the cities of Judah. And King Rehoboam sent Adoram, who was his taskmaster over the forced labor, etc., etc. And when Rehoboam, verse 21, came to Jerusalem, he assembled all the house of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. So Benjamin was associated with Judah. But there would also be a time where Simeon was almost assimilated into Judah, where they basically lost their autonomous identity. So for a time it's Judah and Simeon, for another time it's Judah and Benjamin. So the two, but basically it's identified by one tribe. What's the name of the tribe? Judah. So that's how there's the reckoning taking place. At this point it's Benjamin and Judah, but Benjamin is just north of Judah, and he's going to fluctuate between the two with allegiances, between the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom. Simeon is basically absorbed right in the very mass of the tribe of Judah, its land mass. Not a very big tribe itself.
Benjamin sits on the fence.
Benjamin kind of sits on the fence. Yeah. So in the process of all that's going on, he says, I'm not going to take the kingdom out of your hand, but out of the hand of your son, for the sake of your father David. So the judgment comes, right? The Lord brings judgment, because the Lord had told Solomon, I will do all of this for you, and I will give you long life if you obey my commandments. But Solomon didn't obey his commandments, right? Now, so he says, you have not kept my covenant, verse 11. You've not kept my covenant and my statutes that I've commanded you. So I will what? Your kingdom. I will what? He says, I will tear the kingdom from you. But it's not just tear. I will surely tear the kingdom.
Surely, yeah.
Surely tear the kingdom. So in verse 14, I want you to note a couple of things. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I want us to note it. Verse 14. The Lord raised up an adversary against Solomon, Hadad the Edomite. Right? So now there's a thorn in his side. The Edomites come against him. And then in verse 23, God also raised up as an adversary to him Rezon, the son of Eliada, who had fled from his master Hadadezer, king of Zobah. So now he's got two adversaries come against him. And there will also be a third. And verse 26, Jeroboam the son of Nebat, an Ephraimite of Zerida, a servant of Solomon, whose mother's name was Zeruiah, a widow, also lifted up his hand against the king. So we've got two leaders, Hadad and Rezon, and then we've got one individual who will become a leader, Jeroboam. And we get information regarding Jeroboam and tasks and responsibilities that Solomon has given to him. He doesn't even know that Jeroboam is going to raise his hand against Solomon. But then Solomon sort of gets wind regarding of what's going on, and Jeroboam ends up running away to Egypt for a time. The interesting thing about the promise that, remember the man of God who came to Jeroboam? What was his name? Ahijah. And he gives this instruction to Jeroboam. He said that I'm going to take the kingdom out of Solomon's hands, out of Rehoboam's hands. I'm going to give 10 of those tribes to you. And with that, I'm going to establish your kingdom like I made the promise to David. David's going to continue in Judah. But in the northern kingdom, I'm going to establish you if you walk according to my commandments and my statutes. In other words, I will make you a dynasty. I will give you a kingdom that will continue on from yourself to your son's son, and so on. But it didn't even make it past Jeroboam, because Jeroboam showed himself to be raw, evil. Showed himself to be evil. Now, he started off well, but it's not how we start, right? It's important. We got to continue and finish well. So, this is what's going on. And then in verse 41, we read about the fact that there's all kinds of things that are talked about or spoken about regarding Solomon. They're written in the book of the Acts of Solomon. He reigned over Israel for 40 years. Solomon slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David, his father. And Rehoboam was his son, and he reigned in his place. All right. A couple of things about Rehoboam, because we want to tie off some loose ends here. We mentioned about Josiah, who would be 300 years later, the Mount of Olives. He is a descendant of Solomon. He's one of Solomon's great-great-great-great-great-grandsons. He's a king. Now, a couple of things. Solomon is dead, and who's now the king? Rehoboam is the king. Everybody came to Shechem to make him a king. And as soon as, remember the guy that was told, I'm going to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's son's hands? What's his name? No, okay, he's the one who told him, but who's the one who's going to come? Jeroboam. So as soon as he hears about this, he was in Egypt. When he hears about this, then he returns, and they sent and called for him. And everybody now is coming to Rehoboam. Jeroboam is sort of taking the lead. And they come to him and they ask him a question. Verse 4. All right, we're at John. He reads verse 4 for us. 12 and verse 4. Just 4.
Oh, okay. Thy father made our yoke grievous. Now therefore make thou the grievous service of thy father, and his heavy yoke which he put upon us lighter, and we will serve thee.
Let's do 5 as well.
And he said unto them, Depart yet for 3 days, then come again to me. And the people departed.
Mm-hmm. So they've come and asked a question. What did they say to him? What's the request?
Lighten the load a bit.
Lighten the load a little bit. Interesting. Lighten the load. What's another word for load? What's another word for yoke? Burden. So we've got all those aspects together. Yoke, burden, and what was the other word we had? Load. Load, yoke, and burden. All right. So Solomon, he became burdensome to the people. Rehoboam is now taking the place of his dad. He's got an opportunity to lighten that burden. So Jeroboam, who's been told, I'm going to make you king. I'm going to give you 10 of the tribes. But he doesn't just go and snatch it, does he? Comes first, and he approaches Rehoboam. What are you going to do about this? And with this, he says, go away for how many days? Come back, and I'll tell you my decision. We get a picture here with 3. We get a picture of what? Resurrection. Except there's a contrast in this. Because Rehoboam is not going to come to them with life. He's going to come to them with death. Really, he's coming back to them with death. More burdensome than what they've experienced under his dad. He's going to bring down the hammer. Right? Notice what it says. They said in verse 4, lighten the burden, the load, the yoke, and we will do what? What will our response be? We will serve you. Do you hear any echoes in the New Testament of Jesus' ministry? All right, let's look at King Rehoboam. What did he do?
Destroy this temple
Clarence?
and I'll build it.
Okay, destroy this temple and I'll build it in 3 days. Yeah, so that was at the beginning of Jesus' ministry in John chapter 2. So this is what he says to them in the beginning of his ministry. He's speaking about the temple of his body, right? Clarence, can you read for us verse 6 and 7?
6 to 7, okay, okay. And King Rehoboam And King Rehoboam consulted with the old men that stood before Solomon. I can't see, but just a minute ago. Stood before Solomon his father while he yet lived, and said, how do ye advise that I may enter this people? And they spake unto him, saying, if thou wilt be a servant unto this people this day, and will serve them, and answer them, and speak good words to them, then he will be thy servant forever.
Right. Let's look at a couple of things of what we've read now from verse 4 onwards to where we've completed. Lighten our loads, they said, please, and we will serve you. He said, I'll give you my answer in 3 days. So then he consults with the elders. What's your counsel on this matter? And they said, lighten the load, and the people will serve you how long? Forever.
Yeah.
All the days is really what it means in the Hebrew.
Yeah.
All right. These elders, they had served with Solomon. That means to be an elder in that sense, that meant that these men had what? At least 2 things. Okay, kind of.
Wisdom,
Wisdom. Why?
because they were elder, because they had been along.
All right, so they've got experience, right?
Yeah.
So they've got experience, and as a result of their experience, they've got wisdom. They've been there, they've seen this stuff. All right? What did Solomon ask the Lord for? Give me a what heart? At the very beginning, give me a listening heart, that I would be wise. Give me a listening heart, because wisdom is all about listening, right? Listening to the Lord. Well, here, these elders who had experience, because elders had experience, they had age, and with that, they gained wisdom. And with that wisdom, they're giving that to Solomon's son. And that should have been Rehoboam's, yeah, okay, this is good. I want wisdom. And they told him, if you lighten their loads, then, and speak what kind of words to them?
Favorable.
Okay, favorable, good. So the word is literally, speak to them, devarim tov, word, devarim tovim, good words. Speak to them good things. Speak to them good. What did Jesus speak?
Good.
Everywhere he went about doing good. He went about speaking good. Everything he did was good. So he says, if you will be what to the people? A servant to the people. It's interesting how Solomon begins his reign. The Lord appears to him, and the Lord says, ask what you will. And I want you to notice some of these verses. Back in chapter 3, so 1 Kings 3, look at these couple of verses. 6 through 9, but it's each one of these verses. I'm going to highlight a couple of things for us, all right? 6. Solomon said, you have shown great and steadfast love to your servant David. Verse 7 is, Now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of David, my father. So he's speaking about himself. Verse 8, and your servant is in the midst of your people. And verse 9, give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people. A listening heart, literally, is what that is speaking about. So, and so he says, give your servant an understanding mind, a listening heart, to govern your people, that I may discern between what? Good and evil. Tov and Ra. So it's not just favorable words. That's something that sort of is lost in the translation. It's good words. Speak to them good. What did Solomon want? I want to know between good and evil. I want to be able to speak good words. I want to be a servant. I'm serving. In order to serve others, we need to first be a servant of God. And that's what he prays. Isn't that what Jesus did?
Yeah.
Now, how did Jesus describe that as being a servant?
The greatest in the kingdom.
All right, that's true. Now, let's look at that. What did he say about himself as a servant?
I have not come to serve. Or I have not come to be served, but to serve.
So, I did not come to be served, but to serve. So, we're in Matthew chapter 20 and verse 28, and the parallel is in Mark chapter 10 and verse 45. All right, so before you look, if you've already looked, don't say it, but if you haven't looked yet, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. How does the end of the verse conclude? Anybody know? Without looking. All right, if you've already looked, don't say it. You can look, but don't say it if you look. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many.
That's right, yeah.
The ultimate servant. The ultimate servant. Isn't that what the elders, what wisdom is speaking to Rehoboam? Serve these people. Speak good words to them, and they will what? Serve you forever. All these days. So basically, it's when the Lord spoke to Solomon, he says, because you didn't ask for long days, for the destruction of your enemies and for riches and so on, but you asked for wisdom. I'm going to give you long days. Long days of what? Long days of his kingdom, of his reign, of his rule. But all of these things were contingent on if you follow my statutes and my commands. But we saw in chapter 11, he didn't. So the Lord said, taking it from you. Taking it from your son. It's going to be a division. It's not going to be a complete end, because he made a promise to David, right? Made a covenant with David. But there's going to be 10 of the 12 tribes are going to be given to the northern kingdom, to Jeroboam. So, he didn't listen to the counsel of the old men, of the elders. Instead, he took counsel with whom?
Guys you grew up with.
The guys he grew up with. But literally, the word there is speaking about the young men, the inexperienced. What did Solomon pray? In chapter 3, I am but a child. I'm just a youngster here. I need wisdom. And Rehoboam, instead of listening to wisdom, he says, I'm going to listen to the foolishness of youth. Solomon will write the book of Proverbs, and he says, don't listen to the foolishness of youth. And he said, what do you advise? Lighten the yoke that your father... they said to me, lighten the load, the yoke. The young man who grew up with him said, you show them who's boss. Basically. My little pinky is thicker than my father's thigh. He scourged you with whips, and I'm going to scourge you with scorpions. So the king did not what? Did not listen. See, there's that word again. The king did not listen. The king did not listen. What did Solomon ask for? A listening heart. His son would not listen to wisdom. Now, before we look at that idea of listening, to see if we can wrap things up here tonight, I want to consider one more thing about this burden. Don't lighten the burdens. Make it heavier. What did they ask? Lighten the burden. When Jesus came, and during his ministry, what did he say about burdens?
You carry the burden.
My burden is light. Come to me, all you who are weary,
Heavy laden.
heavy burden. What are these people when they come to Rehoboam?
Heavy laden.
They're weary, heavy burdened, and they're asking for rest, asking for relief. So come back in 3 days, but he doesn't give it to them. So he doesn't come through on what they need because there's only one who can. Jesus. So there's this picture that's shown to them. We need the Messiah. There's a longing. There's a continued longing of the Messiah. Now, we had talked about back here in Matthew 20 and Mark 10, where he says that the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Anybody know the context in why he says that there? It's the end of what he's addressing. Who is he speaking to? What people? Wow. Yeah, he's always speaking to people. Which group of people is he talking to in this instance? Disciples. In response to what? James and John sent Mama to make a request.
Sat next on his right hand.
Yeah. Would you make it so that my sons can sit on your right and on your left when you come into your kingdom? So that's not for me to grant. All the disciples were what? Mad at these two guys. Why?
Ask for something like that.
How dare they ask for something like that? I don't think so.
Before
I think they're mad because
Before I
they
did.
asked before I did. And they got Mama to get involved. They called in the reserves. So they were indignant at the brothers. There you go. Yeah. So Jesus called them to himself, the 12. He said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. This is Matthew 20. It's paralleled in Mark 10. So Matthew 20. He says the Gentiles lord it over them. Isn't this what Rehoboam did?
Yeah.
Called on his peers, and he said, what should we do? Lord it over them. Show them who's boss. Let there be no mistake. I'm the one who rules with an iron scepter here. He says, it shall not be so among you. Whoever would be great among you must be your servant. Interesting. And whoever would be first among you must be your slave. So even more low on the totem pole. Doing the most menial tasks. Doing the most despised tasks. In a household, the lowest servant, the lowest slave, what was their task? What was one of them? Washing the feet of the guests.
Yeah.
And what did Jesus demonstrate
He
on
was
the night of
happy.
fate? He was betrayed. Yeah, he would take, nobody else took that basin. There was no servant. There was no hired servant. There was no slave in the house. But there was a wash basin. Nobody would pick it up. But Jesus did. To show himself to be the servant of all. And that's why he says, even as, it doesn't just say the Son of Man came, but even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. So this is the picture, the contrast, right? It's setting us up to say, there's a longing in my heart, and it's being demonstrated in how the kingdom is developing. Give me a listening heart. Listen to them. But he would not listen to the people. He listened to his peers. He wouldn't listen to the request for rest, for lightening their burdens, their loads. What about Jesus? Did he listen? So what do we have? We looked at an aspect of it last week when we saw in John chapter 5 and John chapter 12 that he listened. Everything. He didn't do anything except that which he saw the Father doing. He spoke nothing except that which he heard his Father speaking. But what passage in the Old Testament speaks of Jesus and his listening? A listening ear. In the book of Psalms, pardon me? Psalm 40.
All?
No. Verses 6 to 8. Well, I guess there's an aspect of that. Psalm 40, verses 6 to 8. And we are at Carolyn.
Six to eight?
Yeah.
You're right, Hebrews.
Hebrews 10. Yeah, we saw it today. Because they look at it from the Septuagint point of view.
Sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but your ears you have pierced.
But what?
Your ears.
Your ears? Is that what it reads?
But
My ears.
Sorry.
Important distinction.
But my ears you have pierced. Burnt offerings and sin offerings you did not require. Then I said, Here I am. I have come. It is written about me in the Psalm. I desire to do your will, O my God. Your law is written within my heart. Your law is within my heart.
So, you didn't delight in sacrifice and offerings, but you've given me an open ear. You have pierced my ears, so to speak. And so Deb was asking, is this a picture of the all? What is the all? A-W-L.
That's all you.
Yeah. So a servant, at the end of his years of servitude, if the owner is to release the servant, the slave. But if the servant says, no, I love my master, I want to stay with you, I want to serve with you, then the master is to take his slave, his servant, and take his ear to the doorpost and take an awl and drive it through the load.
Ouch. They hurt a little.
Indicate that this,
You really want to stay if you want that to happen.
yeah, if you're willing to have that happen, not only is it a permanent mark, but it's going to hurt for a while. But he was willing to be distinguished by experience, to withstand the pain and the discomfort and the mark, which is going to leave an opening in his ear. But indicating that I'm serving. This one is a benefactor. He's a good master. You didn't do that for a master that was harsh. You just wouldn't.
Master didn't want
All right. Well, we won't deal with the hypothetical. So he says, look, this is about Jesus, all right? Now, in Hebrews chapter 10, verses 5 and 6, 5 through 7, it says, a body you have prepared for me. Where it's in Psalm 40, it speaks of, you've given me an open ear, you've pierced my ear. In Hebrews 10, he's quoting from the Septuagint. It's translated just a little bit differently, where it says, a body you have prepared for me. But do you understand where one leads into the other? Because the open ear, not only is it speaking of a piercing where I'm devoted to my master, but it speaks of I listen to my master's voice. My ear is open to your statutes, to your commands. Because him saying I'm a servant didn't all of a sudden give him status in the house to say I'm boss.
Yeah.
The master is still the master. The roles have not changed. He says, I'm going to continue to listen to you and prove myself, show myself to be one who listens closely, intently to your voice. And I will carry out your statutes, your commands. So that's what Jesus is spoken of, like in this instance. So that his ears are open, and that in Hebrews 10, verses 5 through 7, that a body you have prepared for me. What's that now speaking of? I'm giving my whole self. I am the sacrifice. I'm the one who's set apart as the sacrifice. Then I said in verse 7, behold, I have come. In the scroll of the book it is written of me. I delight to do your will, O my God. Your law is within my heart. See, it's all about the contrast of what Jesus came to fulfill where everyone else lacked, where they fell short. Let's finish this off. Come back to 1 Kings 12. So as a result of all this, the king did not listen to the people. The Lord had turned his heart. All right? And now, all the people, they say, let's go to our homes. David, in other words, they consider themselves to be followers of the house of David, but Rehoboam does not reflect David at all. All right? So Rehoboam reigned over the people of Israel who lived in the cities. So the kingdom is now divided, and shortly thereafter, Jeroboam is going to be displayed or proclaimed as king. In verse 25, then Jeroboam built Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim and lived there. He went out from there and built Penuel. He said in his heart, now the kingdom will turn back to the house of David. If this people go up to offer sacrifices in the temple of the Lord at Jerusalem, then the heart of this people will turn again to their Lord. Now this is not capital L. This is little l, meaning not God, but Rehoboam. Their hearts will turn back to Rehoboam, king of Judah. They'll kill me and return to Rehoboam, king of Judah. But he was concerned. Now, did God promise Jeroboam, if you follow my statutes and my commands, I'll give you a dynasty. I'll give you a kingdom. What does Jeroboam do? I gotta take care of this myself. I gotta look after it. Pardon? Yeah. And so what does he do? He takes counsel, but he's listening to the wrong voices. Right? It's always listening. And the counsel was make 2 calves of gold. Where does that come from? Right back, Exodus chapter 32. It came from Egypt to Mount Sinai, and now they've built golden calves. So these are your gods, O Israel, that have led you out of Egypt. And he said to the people, you've gone up to Jerusalem long enough, except God did not tell them, don't go anymore to Jerusalem. They're still to go to Jerusalem, the place where he has placed his name. Where God will listen. He will hear their prayer. At the what? The temple, right? So that mandate, that command, that statute has not stopped. God did not end it. And then he says, behold your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Same thing that Aaron told them back when they came out of Egypt. Jeroboam does the same thing, and he puts one in Dan and the other one in Bethel. In other words, one in the north above the Galilee, the Sea of Galilee, and the other one in Bethel, which is just at the lowest portion of the new kingdom of Israel, before the border of Judah. So it's just above Jerusalem. It became a sin, and the people continued to worship after, and he initiated anyone who wanted to be a priest in this new order of worship could do so. No longer were they Levites. So he caused them to worship at it. And look at verse in chapter 13. I'm going to summarize this now. the Lord chose a man to come up and speak against Jeroboam. Jeroboam was standing by the altar that was erected by these golden calves. All right? So he's come to Bethel. What did I say?
Beside, not by. The golden calves didn't make the altar.
Oh, so beside them, sorry. He made them placed them beside the golden calves. So these sacrifices were offered at this place. And so he's in Bethel. And the man cried against the altar by the word of the Lord and said, O altar, altar, thus says the Lord, behold, a son shall be born to the house of David, Josiah by name. Pay close attention. He already names him how many years in advance? 300 years before this man is born. And he shall sacrifice on you the priests of the high places who make offerings on you, and human bones shall be burned on you. And he gave a sign the same day, saying, this is the sign that the Lord has spoken. Behold, the altar shall be torn down, and the ashes that are on it shall be poured out. The king says, take him, seize him. And the hand that he reached out to point at them and say, go take him, it was shriveled up. He could not draw it back to himself. So it was like this. It was like it was frozen now. And the altar was torn down, and the ashes poured out from the altar according to the sign that the man of God had given by the word of the Lord.
What amazes me is, even despite that, he doesn't repent or nothing, he just continues on. You
No,
think
he-
something like that I'd be freaked out, you know?
As his hand shriveled like this and became essentially petrified, it's like his heart experienced the same thing. It was like this was a picture of what was going on in his heart.
Connection, like, it makes you think of the man in Jesus' day in the synagogue who had a shriveled hand. There's got to be something connected there.
And think about the shriveled hand was which hand? The right hand.
Yeah.
And with the man who had the withered hand, it was also the right hand. So the hand of strength and the hand of authority, of honor and dignity, because it was the other hand that was used for hygiene. So you would not extend the left hand. You would not share in the common pot of food with the left hand, because it was considered a disgrace. But if the only hand that works, or the only hand you have is the left hand, you've got to take care of business on both ends without trying to be crass at all. And so you would be considered to be defiled on more than one level. Like you're just unclean and defiled and an outcast.
That's why teachers way back when, you don't use that hand, you use your right hand, even though you can't write with it.
Well, I don't know if that's the reason, but I couldn't say.
That's what happened to my dad.
Yeah, but I couldn't say.
But the teachers were very stern back then
They
to
were.
use the right, use the right.
So, but I don't know that was the exact reason, but nevertheless, they did do that during your dad's day.
Oh, yeah.
2 Kings 23, this is where we end. We're a bit longer because we want to finish this off. 2 Kings 23.
I do that because
Now, chapter 22, just want to draw your attention there. Josiah was 8 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 31 years in Jerusalem. Gives some information regarding him in chapter 22. And then chapter 23. And the king sent, and all the elders of Judah and Jerusalem were gathered to him. The king went up to the house of the Lord. Which house is this? The temple, the house that Solomon had built. The house that the Lord said, I will place my name there. The house that the Lord said, I will listen, I will see and I will listen. I'll see and hear the prayers of my people. The king went up to the house of the Lord, all the men, all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and the priests, and the prophets, all the people, both small and great, and he read in their hearing all the words of the book of the covenant that had been found in the house of the Lord. Because the book of the covenant, the law, had been placed in the house of the Lord for years and years, and basically collecting dust because a former king had decided he was going to go to Damascus, and he liked the temple that was there, and he sent blueprints back. He shut the doors of the temple of the Lord, and he had another altar of sacrifice made, and he displaced the bronze altar, put this one in a more prominent place, and basically brought devastation upon himself and the nation. So, in chapter 22, Josiah said, clean everything up, get it ready, and consecrate the house of the Lord. And so they discovered the book of the covenant. And so he reads it. And the king stood by the pillar and made a covenant before the Lord to walk after the Lord and to keep his commandments and his testimonies and his statutes with all his heart and all his soul, to perform the words of this covenant that were written in this book. And all the people joined in the covenant. Sounds like a precursor or a type of Christ. And the king commanded Hilkiah, the high priest, and the priests of the second order, and the keepers of the threshold, bring out of the temple of the Lord all the vessels that were made for Baal, Asherah, and for all the hosts of heaven. He burned them outside Jerusalem in the fields of the Kidron. Where's the Kidron? That's this valley right here. Bring the stuff out, and all of these implements and so on that were used for the worship of these false gods, brought them out, and he burned them in Kidron Valley. And he deposed the priests whom the kings of Judah had ordained to make offerings in the high places at the cities of Judah and all around Jerusalem. Those also who burned incense to Baal, to the sun and the moon and the constellations and all the host of the heavens. He brought out the Asherah from the house of the Lord outside Jerusalem to the brook Kidron. So the same place. And burned it at the brook Kidron, beat it to dust, cast the dust of it upon the graves of the common people. Broke down the houses of the male cult prostitutes who were in the house of the Lord, where the women wove hangings for the Asherah. He brought all the priests out of the cities of Judah, defiled the high places where the priests had made offerings, from Geba to Beersheba, and he broke down the high places of the gates that were at the entrance of the gate of Joshua, the governor of the city, which were on one's left at the gate of the city. However, the priests of the high places did not come up to the altar of the Lord in Jerusalem, but they ate unleavened bread amongst their brothers. And he defiled Topheth, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom. This valley right here. That's Topheth, which is connected to Molech and Chemosh. So that no one might burn his son or his daughter as an offering to Molech any longer. And he removed the horses that the kings of Judah had dedicated to the sun at the entrance to the house of the Lord by the chamber of Nathan-Melech, the chamberlain, which was in the precincts. He burned the chariots of the sun with fire, and the altars on the roof of the upper chamber of Ahaz, which the kings of Judah had made, the altars that Manasseh had made in the two courts of the house of the Lord. Manasseh was his grandfather. He pulled down and broke in pieces and cast the dust of them into the brook Kidron. The king defiled the high places that were east of Jerusalem. What places are they? Places that were east of Jerusalem, to the south of the Mount of Corruption, which Solomon, the king of Israel, had built for Ashtoreth, the abomination of the Sidonians, and for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. And he broke in pieces the pillars, cut down the Asherim, and filled their places with the bones of men. And the altar at Bethel, the high place that was erected by Jeroboam, son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin, that altar with the high place he pulled down and burned, reducing it to dust. He burned the Asherah. He turned and he saw the tombs that were on the mountain. He sent and took the bones out of the tombs and burned them on the altar and defiled it, according to what? The word of the Lord that the man of God proclaimed, who had predicted these things. And it goes on. How thorough was he?
Very thorough.
He's like, enough is enough is enough. No more. 300 years of this. No more. The defilement of our forefathers. No more. Showing, essentially, what is he doing here? He's doing something that Jesus did twice in his ministry. Once at the beginning and once at the end. Cleaned out the temple.
Right.
My house is to be a house of prayer for all nations. You've made it a den of thieves. And so we see there's hope once again. Messiah is coming. But there will be 5 kings that follow him that will all be wicked. And yes. And they will all, they will be the last of the kings of Judah before they're brought into exile. And it's from Josiah onward that Jeremiah will prophesy. The prophet? He prophesies during Josiah's and his son's reigns. So there we see Solomon. He did have a reign of peace, but it was not without its downfalls, problems, and sin. There was a picture of Jesus in the good that he did, but contrasted by the evil that he did as well, showing that Jesus is the one who would come and fulfill all the longings of man's heart and the righteousness of the Father. So that Jesus truly is the one who brings the reign of peace in men's hearts and throughout the realm, throughout the kingdom, forever. Lighten their burdens, and they will serve you all the days of the kingdom, is really what that is. So let's purpose to serve him, and we will see the kingdom of Jesus, a reign of peace, established. And we'll get to serve him all those days. See his righteousness and glories be demonstrated. The glory of the Lord will be displayed from the rising of the sun to the setting of the sea.